By the time Professor Layton was ready for his third entry, the series had become a worldwide phenomenon. With millions of copies sold and countless knockoffs appearing on the shelves, Level 5 had made a lot more than just a couple of games. They had created an empire, but the series was always planned as a trilogy. So despite the blazing success the franchise had found, it was time for the professor to take off his hat and give his final bow, and Level 5 was going to make sure of that no matter what. For his final entry would be the greatest tale they ever told, and the first to truly introduce us to Professor Layton. But before we get into that, I want to talk about someone else, Phoenix Wright. Chances are, if you know the famous professor, you know the Ace Attorney, and also maybe the Murder Bear, the Ghost Man, and the Detective. Ace Attorney was a very popular series. The original trilogy has been re-released a bunch of times and adapted as a manga, anime, live action, whatever the hell this is. But if you want to know just how popular it was, it inspired the very Professor Layton, and eventually they would star in a crossover together, which we all know as Yokai Nah, let's just not do that. The very first trailer for Professor Layton vs. Phoenix Wright dropped in October of 2010, and good lord. I've probably watched this trailer at least 100 times, even after the game came out, because it's so magnificent, and they ended up altering a lot of the scenarios, but I'm getting sidetracked. I bring this up because the little 13-year-old Ace Attorney fan known as Voyan saw this trailer and was like, oh shit. Two of them. I bought the first game, Instant Classic, and I bought the second game, Majora's Mask Style Classic. Then I went out to buy the new game at the time, Professor Layton in the Unwound Future, or the Lost Future in Europe. Yes, this is the point at which I got rolling with the series. I finished it in under a week and said, I probably didn't say anything at all, I was just sobbing. This might not only be the greatest Professor Layton story, but it is easily the longest. It's a game that speaks for itself, and no amount of preliminary is going to do it. So why don't we just go ahead and get started, because it's going to be a big one this time. I'm Voyan, and today we're going to revisit, dissect, and digest everything that made this entry to be considered the fan favorite, but I really want to emphasize this time especially, I'm going to cruise through this whole plot, and it is a divine work of art, so please, if you're even slightly curious, Village, please don't watch this video until you've had the luxury of playing the third Layton game, or if you're going to, at least watch the other videos I did on the first two games so that you're kinda caught up. But otherwise, grab a snack, sit back, and let's enjoy a nice, relaxing... Oh, we're in London. Okay, never mind. So the game opens with the professor and Luke riding a bus through London, Luke clutching a letter addressed from someone who claims to be him 10 years in the future. According to this older Luke, future London is a mess because it definitely already isn't, and he needs our help to fix it.
Attention, calling all
Professor Layton
gamers.
He says he can't give out much detail in the letter, but to start by heading to the clock shop on Midland Road, which I assume is what we're doing. Luke wonders how we can verify this isn't a prank, bro, and the professor says we can't, but that it probably has something to do with the events of last week, which we then flash back to, and this is almost the exact same setup that Diabolical Box opened with. I love it.
It all started about a week ago.
Okay, pay attention because we got London's finest in this cutscene. Professor Layton, Inspector Chelmy, Constable Barton. I mean, I did say London's finest. Also, this angry-looking man who we'll learn is the Prime Minister. And why are they all here? Because they've been invited by Dr. Stongun. Subtle. They've been selected to view a live demonstration of a time machine, but that's not even what has the professor's eye. No, he's more curious about this dude who's looking for another dude who snuck in, and... it's time, baby. Who gave me a diploma? Yeah, the first puzzle, it's easy, but I still had to bust out the memo pad, and... well... we solve the first puzzle and Luke gets really excited that he just narked, and now the presentation begins.
After years of research in the field of time travel, I'm pleased to share the fruits of my labor. In just a few short moments, I will be moving on to our scheduled demonstration.
Okay, honestly, best voice acting in the game, maybe in the series. I thought he sounded familiar, that's because he plays Navarre, Akihiko, Zaz, Dio, and the only role I would have recognized at the time, Gara. Life is funny. The doctor starts his speech and invites the Prime Minister on Whoa, what is that? Did he just pan-crop the Prime Minister into relevance?
Today is a monumental day, not only for our great nation, but for the entire human race. Since the beginning of time, we humans have strived to transcend our natural limits.
Bill Hawks gives his speech, and once finished, Dr. Stungun proposes that he volunteers in the machine. He's kind of persistent about it. And even though Bill initially objects, as well as his wife, or the fact that how do you even volunteer in a time machine, like, dude! He does it anyway. And then...
What the dickens just happened? Something's gone very wrong.
Where is he? Someone find Bill!
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm and refrain from panicking.
This is chaos! The Prime Minister and Dr. Stangun have vanished!
Okay, that's the premise. Professor Layton's time machine and the Prime Minister is missing. Back in the not flashback, the Professor brings up even more disappearances. Some of London's greatest scientists have been vanishing without a trace, and he thinks that it's probably all connected to the mysterious letter and tragic demonstration. So following the clue in the letter, the Professor and Luke set off. What awaited them was one of the best games they've ever starred in. Okay, yeah, now this is more like it. Back on foot, back in our normal navigation. The music is a sad piano combined with a reluctant accordion, and they could not have got the mood captured more accurately. We pull out the map and are greeted with puzzle number 2, and this time, well, yeah, get it? Time, clock, future, oh, level 5 must have thought that was just so funny because the next one was time-oriented, and so was the one after that. Spoiler alert, that's like the whole game. But finally, after some brief tutorials that I don't need because this is my 3rd Professor Layton game in 7 months, we find ourselves at the clock shop underneath a colossal specimen. The clock shop owner is definitely strange, but she recognizes the professor, just not the letter telling us to come here. She said her husband might know something about it and he's on his way now. So while waiting, we examine some of the surroundings and find, shocker, another clock puzzle. Figuring out what time it is without the numbers, oh my, it's tricky. Then we examine some more, find another puzzle. It's literally the exact same one. They should just rename this game to Professor Layton and the concept of clock hands. Spring's husband returns, named Cog. Now it's really Ace Attorney. He wasn't expecting the duo so soon, but has instructions to show them his largest clock when they arrive, but he needs us to get it working with a gear first. Okay, you know what? Maybe the clock puzzles weren't so bad. The professor successfully places the gear, and the clock begins to work, and...
Are you all right, Luke?
Yes, that was quite a shake.
Huh? What is going on here?
And just where in the world are we?
Emerging outside into the streets of London, the door immediately locks behind them. Layton and Luke now gaze in shock at their twisted, familiar surroundings and say it looks even worse. The intro to this game is long and ambitious, as you can tell. They are raising this story to be pretty expansive, and to be honest, that's a lot of this game, just solid chunks of information and nothing else in between, even with me skipping over the trivial details. If it seems slow so far, just you wait, but we'll talk more about the pacing in a bit. This is finally Chapter 1, the moment the real game begins. This is our time to explore and gather clues about the strange new environment we found ourselves in. It's classic Layton, and we do this, of course, by talking to construction workers. He says construction's been going on a year, but how can that be when 5 minutes ago we walked past and there was nothing but a quite dank area? There's more timely discrepancies, a cafe that's suddenly open or the bus not running. And as we speak to more and more people, we begin to realize everyone here hates hats. Particularly, everyone is scared of or hostile towards Professor Layton, mostly because of the hat he wears. Luke lays out the possible theory that they may have accidentally traveled into the future, as even the bus stopped running 5 years ago, but at that moment a postman named Shipley shows up with a letter for us. He has us complete a puzzle to verify our identity, and this one was pretty fun, not gonna lie. Future Luke sends us a letter saying congratulations on making it to his time safely, and for proof that it is indeed the future to head to the hospital, so we set off to do that. But then a lady tells us to go to a hotel, so then we set off to do that. But then Luke bumps into a girl who's the shape of an egg. I'm bored. So we reach the hotel called Hotel Duke. Nope, not gonna do it, too easy. Apparently our room has the best view in the hotel, maybe because it has the last window. Let's go! The professor and Luke put their things down and decide to head out on detour through the arcade because Becky says to check out the restaurant. But once we get there, we learn it's closed. I think this part has no real story value, but it does have some baller puzzles. The Banana Slide series. Think of these as the natural evolution of the ice puzzles, but a little bit more sophisticated. They're probably my favorite introduced in this game because the sliding puzzles that I used to love so much are just really not that fun this time around. Between being set to a number of steps, having to keep things in order, or just not being able to even see the damn puzzle, I just didn't enjoy these ones as much as the previous two games' fairly simple objectives like get the ball out, and it sucks because this game is dripping with them, but they're all stiff and rigid, like stalactite. Meanwhile, all the other puzzles I find to be really simple. Maybe it's because I've been playing these games consistently through the year and my brain is in shape, you know, head gymnastics. Curious Village and Diabolical Box had puzzles that stumped me so bad they are burned into my mind and have been for over a decade. There's no puzzle like that in Unwound Future, which is probably a good thing. There's a lot of multiple choice puzzles and a lot of puzzles that rely on visual interpretation. Nothing new, but sometimes I feel like they could have gone a bit further. This puzzle, for example, asked me to find where the star will be if all these houses share an equal plot of land, but it won't let you draw it out. You just have to circle the answer. And I get the point is to imagine with your eyes, or just use the memo pad with all of its new features. But then there's a ton of other unique puzzles that show me why the hands-on stuff is so much more fun, so much more experimental. Granted, I also found these puzzles too easy. Here's the thought. Something I've realized after a decade, maybe the puzzles weren't getting easier, I was just getting older. Sure, you can say Curious Village had hard puzzles because most of them didn't apply to the story and they were still figuring out the best level for the audience with the first game, but if you were playing Layton alongside Release, then you were growing up with the professor. This is probably more obvious in regards to the plot. You'll discover this game is more suited to mature topics, ones that are easier for the audience to relate to than the past two games. But before we get back to that, just real quick, the super hint. For those who did find this game's puzzles to be hard, well, level 5 was tossing you an all-new tool, the super... Oh, hold on. Let me use my special sound effect. Super hint. This comes after the third hint and costs 2 coins, but it's a strong piece of information that all but gives you the answer, unless it's a sliding block puzzle. Even then, the hints do their best, but then you have to memorize the directions they're telling you to move in, and it becomes just a whole different kind of puzzle. The super hint is basically the only fundamental change between this and the last game. I mean, they added other very minor stuff like the memo pad ink colors, but easily the thing they introduced in this game that I think nobody gives credit is this little arrow on the top screen because it tells you exactly where to go in this damn labyrinth of a future London. I say this as someone who loves SMT dungeon crawling. What are we even doing right now? Oh yeah, we're on our way to the hospital. Dupree tells us about the family, those goons in black with the hats and shades. This group lawlessly controls London as the police have faded and we... Never record a video at noon. The police have faded, and when we look at Dupree's newspaper, it is in fact dated 10 years in the future. So after that big ol' filler segment, get used to it, we are finally back on the main task of heading to the hospital. When we arrive, we head upstairs, only to learn that Andrew Schrader, 10 years in the future. He tells us he's heard nasty rumors about the professor, but that he doesn't believe any of them. And you know what else, Professor? Here, do this puzzle.
Goddamn 47.
Andrew gives us the keys to what we would find is Layton's very deteriorated old car. Obviously it won't start, but on the seat, another letter from future Luke saying we gotta squat up at the casino. Even as early as this point, I remember hating future Luke. Why is he sending us on a wild goose chase? Dude, just meet us so we can move this game along already, damn. Now the professor and Luke are heading for the casino, but they need directions, so Luke tries to ask a family goon despite the game warning us several times. Wow, no wonder you're the apprentice here. We try to ask Hazel, who runs away because, again, Professor Layton's hat. When Luke says why not just take it off for now, the professor refuses. But finally, we ask Becky, who gives us directions, but also warns us that the casino is family turf. Now that's strange. Why would future Luke want to meet us in such a dangerous place? Well, we head there anyway when this interaction happens.
Huh?
The unknown girl passes with one of the sharpest sound effects that my DS could hardly produce, leaving the professor in a state of shock before...
Oh, it's just beautiful, Herschel.
Oh, do you really like it?
I don't just like it. I love it. Thank you so much.
Picking out the right gift can be quite the puzzle.
Lucky for me, every puzzle has an answer. Isn't that what you always say?
Yes, well. I've been thinking,
Go on.
if I were to get the teaching job, then we... Well,
I'm listening, Herschel.
oh, I'll tell you later.
Come on now. Tell me more about these plans of yours.
No, it was nothing.
This is an important scene for a lot of reasons, but for the very first time ever in the whole series, we just saw a glimpse at Professor Layton's personal life, not solving puzzles or being used as our transportational plot device. This isn't Layton the professor, it's Layton the human, and it's incredibly interesting that the first look we have is of his romantic endeavors. Because not only is it giving the protagonist who comes across so perfectly a vulnerability in his feelings for this woman, he also hesitates to express himself, a flaw which may or may not have worked itself out in the time since, contributing to who he is today. When he snaps out of it, he tells Luke he was probably just imagining it, a girl he used to know long before. The two of them make it to the casino, only to be stopped by the future version of Ghost Trick. He has them do a stupid puzzle, and then we're finally inside the casino where we meet the Luke Triton of the future.
So you're...
He's the future me?
It's good to finally meet you, Professor. Or rather, I suppose I should say it's nice to see you again.
This is going to take some getting used to.
I can't believe how small I used to be.
After the initial shock that is realizing you've kept the same style for 10 years, the future Luke also says he needs to verify our identity because there's many Layton wannabes.
I challenge you to a battle of wits!
Okay, you know this moment was so charged. He just pointed at the guy who usually does the pointing. Oh, shit! And then he begins the Battle of Wits. A Battle of Wits is, credit where it's due, one of the few new things in this game. It's a different style of formatted puzzle sequence. Who am I kidding? It's just really a fancy story puzzle like at the end of the last game. The music slaps though. So after some intense cards and trick questions, future Luke knows it's us and he drags us into the back room so we can talk in private, and you better get ready because there's about to be a lot here. So, the future London we've been exploring is warped because an evil genius came to power, but not just any evil genius. It is in fact the Professor Layton of the future who's been ruling with an iron fist, aka the family, which is also why people fear the image of him and his signature top hat. When questioned how things got to be this way, future Luke hands us an article with the events from the beginning of the game, the Time Machine incident. You remember. Many people went missing in that disaster, including the Prime Minister, which resulted in a broken parliament, but according to future Luke, at least one person is known to have survived and gone into hiding. The man responsible for it all, Dr. Stungun. And the person who gave him shelter? For whatever reason, it was Professor Layton, and it gets crazier. After this, the professor started to space himself from Luke and make friends with underworld criminals. Future Luke says the professor then was obsessed with changing the past, and while the doctor needed money to continue his work, the professor was fixing up in London's underbelly to provide it, until he finally created a prototype in the clock shop, the same one we used to get here in the first place, although it's very unstable and only really goes to this point 10 years forward and back. That's a wormhole, and that's also how future Luke sent us the letter. But what confuses Layton is how we got to access it anyways, because shouldn't the wormhole be guarded? And future Luke says he'll get to that, but that he wants our help to bring down the evil professor, and we agree, deciding to head to his lair in Chinatown. But on our way out...
Oh, there you are, boss! Oi! What are you doing wearing the boss's getup? This your idea of a joke?
Professor, run away while you can!
Don't let him escape! You hear? Don't let him escape!
Turns out future London is just modern America.
Do you see a way out?
I do.
The professor says he has a plan, but he needs future Luke's help, so they team up to make a gun. Yeah, this is a real puzzle. Someone get me Sakurai on the phone right this instant. After we escape the casino, future Luke says let's meet up with one of his associates at the restaurant, and it's Shipley. He tells us evil Layton is holed up in the pagoda in Chinatown with a bunch of kidnapped scientists, maybe even the Prime Minister, maybe even Styx the Badger. But since security in that part of town is heavy, future Luke suggests splitting up so we don't grab as much attention. He leaves the party and the duo heads to Chinatown, but once again on our way, the professor sees that same girl. He chases after her, only to find no one. And he gazes long and hard at himself in the reflection of a hat shop.
Here you go.
What's this now?
Open it and see.
A hat?
For the newly appointed professor. Congratulations! You're a fully fledged member of the academic community now. So you've got to look the part. Very dashing, Herschel. The picture of a true gentleman.
A true gentleman?
No, leave it on. It suits you. It really does. So no taking it off. Oh, look at the time. I didn't realize how late it was. I have to go to the lab. We're running a very important experiment today. Let's continue this celebration over dinner tonight. Oh, and promise me you'll wear the hat. It's not your usual style, but keep an open mind. After all, isn't that what a gentleman does?
So not only do we now understand the origin of the hat and the professor's teachings about gentlemen not taking it off, we also know the woman's name, Claire. And you may begin to wonder where the heck this girl has been for the 3 games we've known the professor, but he alludes to himself that after that awful day, Claire is no longer here. But I guess that's probably not as important as the scientists we talked to that had wet footprints. Luke and the professor find a look-alike statue that's engraved with a story about everlasting friendship, and Luke gets really defensive and upset for some reason. We talk to more wet scientists, this dude who was forced to dig holes, this guy in the black market. When we get as far as we can, we're outside the gate to Chinatown, but it's guarded by 2 guys who look like, wow. The professor remarks how nice it would be to go over everything with the present-day inspector, and that's when future Luke catches up and says that he can do just that by sending us back through the wormhole to our own time, so we set off to do that, and that's chapter 3. But we're a decent chunk into this game now, so let's go ahead and start breaking it down. First, this pacing. And I didn't think it could get any worse after Diabolical Box, where you're basically waiting on a train in the early game, but literally that whole chapter we just did was us walking all the way to Chinatown, only to decide to do that later. Like I said, these story relays are huge. This is the longest game, an absurd 15 chapters, and you might wonder why level 5 decided to go this hard, but let me post something for you guys. If you go back and read the reviews from over a decade ago on this game, they almost all say the exact same thing, that it's the same formula as the last 2 games. There's no changes, there's no evolution, there's nothing new here. And they were right. I mean, basically all I've done so far in this video is talk about the story because we already know how this works. It's the same game and level 5 wasn't changing it. But why would they? They had one more game to go before finishing the trilogy. Did these reviewers really expect level 5 to try and overhaul everything this close to the end? Of course not, they couldn't risk that. The only thing they could do was the story. Rather than change things, why not perfect what's currently there, giving us a plot reminiscent to the human experience and carried by wonderful characters. Alas, the only downside to a story this big is the pacing at which it's told, And then you also have the atmosphere. Let's just call it like it is. A pay cut. St. Mystere and False Sense were wondrous towns that I could not wait to find out more about and loved spending every second in. Like, Curious Village has a very basic plot, but why do people remember it? Because the village is weird, and there's the potential for thousands of stories in this kind of place. And then in this game, we have London, a real-world city, and future London, which they could have done so much more with. Neither of these towns are really too interesting because they have to keep themselves grounded underneath the image of the actual city. That's people, landmarks, culture, but future London is fictional. It's the chance to take the strides of the environments this series is used to, and they just didn't. It's a dystopian steampunk that's kinda dirty, like it's got that brown filter that every other game in 2010 had. I'm not saying that the developers weren't onto something with that and that it doesn't fit, but I am saying that it was less interesting to me as a result. Because of the 6 games, this one's atmosphere is easily my least favorite. But the reason that always gets excused is because, once again, the plot and characters are more developed than they ever have been. It's just kind of a trudge for now, but let us resume right at the Chapter 4 door. So heading back to the clock shop so we can head back to the present, the professor asks future Luke when the lighthouse on the River Thames was built. Future Luke says about 5 years back, and when the professor asks why, future Luke says it's not important, we need to get you back, I hate this guy. We find a man who says a parrot stole his cufflinks, so after another incredibly claustrophobic sliding block puzzle, future Luke and Luke shine a gem to attract the bird. This is an image filled with nothing but raw masculine power. The bird approaches and starts squawking, and him and Luke befriend each other, and I guess starts to travel with the party. You actually get to name him. I chose the name Squawks because he was squawking. He's got the same colors. The game is set in the UK. They make it back to the clock shop, and future Luke teaches them the secret knock that will get them in. Once we enter, we learn that the owners and future Luke are actually cohorts, and that one day the family came and somehow installed the wormhole here, which was a prime spot because the clock's age, and now Spring and Cog are the only ones who can access it. TLDR, the clock shop is unaffected grounds, kind of like the TARDIS from Doctor Who, except I'm not sure why I wrote that because I've never seen the show. Don't take me seriously. And the professor and Luke are using it to go back to the present, which they then do. But before heading to see Inspector Chelmy, the duo first grabs a bus to swing by Layton's office because alongside his usual intellect, there's something bothering him. And that something is his student named Rosetta. What the hell is going on here? Now, what kind of attitude is that to have, Rosetta? If you want those credits, you'll have to earn them. Heh, I didn't mean to imply I wasn't interested in the work. And I'm very much looking forward to our sessions together. Not every girl has the privilege of receiving private instruction from the great Professor Layton. Heading into the professor's office, we find Flora. You all remember Flora. She's bitter because the professor left her there. Obviously, solitude would be perfect for the girl who spent basically her whole life alone. But the professor knows future London isn't safe, so it comes from a place of love, and Flora can reason with that. She then leaves to get us tea, and the professor grabs the notebook he came for and dips a second time on Flora, Luke even calling him out. Nice job. Yeah, there's a future Luke and there's a future professor, but where's the future Flora? Forgotten about and wasted. Thanks, level 5. Now back on the bus, the professor starts to explain the contents of the notebook he grabbed. 10 years before the present, 2 physicists at the Institute of Polydimensional Research accidentally set off an explosion that destroyed the lab and even parts of the neighboring buildings. The explosion killed a handful of people, but any media coverage and records of the event were oddly suppressed. Layton has no idea why, but he believes that the 2 explosions of the past and present to be connected, and is hoping the inspector might have more answers. As we arrive at Scotland Yard, we find Barton. Barton, we wish to have a few words with the inspector, but I don't see him here. I don't see him here either. Oh my god, I love Barton. We meet Inspector Chelmy, and him and the professor decide to go over the incident together, but first he needs to look at the police records of the explosion 10 years ago, and Chelmy clears him to do so. After reading up on the data, the professor quizzes Chelmy about what he remembers. There was 2 scientists, Dimitri Allen and someone else, who caused an explosion, but they survived. However, many others died, including tenants in the next building over, and a lab assistant, and oh, it's coming together now, isn't it, baby? Professor says, welp, Prime Minister is caged in the future, and Chelmy doesn't believe him, so Layton's like, well, I gotta go. And we head back to the clock shop so we can return to future London, but we're followed by Chelmy, by Barton, and even by Flora. And though the professor says, hold on, Cog, don't do it yet, We are back in the future with 3 more people. Over here, Chelmy and Barton struggle to believe their surroundings, and we decide to take Flora to the hotel so we can run the situation by her, then go to the observation deck so we can rendezvous with future Luke. Homie Luke from the future says that he's got a plan to get by the guards at the gate using Squawks the bird to relieve them of their duty. Yeah, this part is weird. First of all, just look at this JRPGs party. 2 grown men, a boy, a girl, and bird traveling to Chinatown in future London. On the way, we find that statue again, and Luke says to future Luke, well, since you're me, you've been through everything that I have or have to go through, and it's gonna be alright, right? And future Luke gives Luke some vaguely positive advice. Obviously, he's alive and upstanding, so Luke will be fine in that regard, but he can't just give him all the answers since that'll warp time and rob him of the progression he needs to undergo. Basically, the takeaway in this scene, what's going on with Luke? What could he be hiding? Why is future Luke tiptoeing around it? In any case, the bird saves the day and grants access for us to Chinatown. Wow, I wrote that as a transition. Chinatown, future London. We start off by talking to locals and learn that the family has a very heavy presence here, and they also tell us to stay away from the tower in the distance, which I guess we're getting pretty used to hearing 3 games in. The gate to the pagoda is guarded by Ward, who tells us his boss is out, so to kill time, we talk to more people, more puzzles, more wet feet, until Rudolph tells us a rumor that the boss can often be found on River Thames, and that we should check out the restaurant there. Boy, do we love recommending food in future London. So when we go to the river, we find a mutant goddamn rabbit. I absolutely forgot this part of the plot.
I don't like that glint in his eye. He looks like he could attack us at any moment.
Hello, I hope you're enjoying this lovely day. Would you mind if we pass through here?
You humans are so full of yourself. Always acting like you own a place. But this here's my turf. Take one more step and I'll rearrange your kneecaps.
Test Subject 3 here was a lab animal snatched up by scientists and experimented on. From the sounds of it, it seems like they were forcing him through space-time trials. Always shop cruelty-free. He says he has no idea what happened to the test subjects before him. I don't know, pal. I haven't seen any other talking animals today. And that's basically that part of the game. We go to the restaurant. Barkeep says we just missed the guy matching our description. The egg girl from earlier comes and says the people are looking for you. Well, they can find us because nothing is happening. That was chapter 8, aka 23 minutes of nonsense. I remember there being a lot to this story. I just didn't recall how much of it was backtracking, interpret how you may. So I want to take a break to talk about the trunk minigames now, like we do every time. You know how this goes. 3 side puzzles included in the trunk with every Professor Layton game with some bossa. And these ones are fun, I guess. The toy car minigame is basically the hamster minigame from Diabolical Box, but more simplified. Instead of picking up items for the hamster, you pick up stages from NPCs, then build a course that your car follows using a limited amount of tiles, that is. There's a game it reminds me of, but I can't think of what it is, something akin to Mario vs. Donkey Kong. I actually really enjoyed this one, I'm just not very good at it. I get the point is to tinker with what you have and try to imagine different ways you can optimize your route, but the perfection aspect, the fact that there's only one answer where things needed to be placed perfectly, somewhat deters me. And that's definitely the case with the parrot minigame. If it looks like a cool little physics launcher game in the spirit of the other birds, I mean, it is that, if you want to not win. The answers to this are so unbelievably complicated. Even with just 3 ropes, you want to project where the parrot needs to go and how to get him there, but also account for gravity, the arc of his flutter, the bounce back. I hated this one. Sorry, Squawks. I think it goes without saying, but I didn't finish either of these minigames. One because it was too hard, the other because I didn't like it. Because it was too hard. But I did finish the last minigame, the storybook. This one is really simple, but unlike what we're used to, it's fill in the blank with pictures to make a story sound correct. You get these little scrapbook images and need to put them in the story so that when placed, the story will read feasibly. It's more word comprehension than anything else, and I personally eat that up. Also, they turn the toy car theme into a chimey lullaby that makes me feel warm and protected. All the rewards for completing these are basically the same, access to the really hard bonus puzzles, but I just feel like this game is so long as it is that I have no desire to do any extra stuff, but for the people looking for it, there's tons here, and I will never fault a game for that. I literally can't. Now let's go deck that evil professor right in his torso. The team heads back to Chinatown to the pagoda so they can confront the boss. We get another annoying sliding block puzzle. Once again, I feel like the legibility of this one just didn't work. And then we are inside anticipating the meeting of good professor versus evil professor. And Flora says that's gonna be hard considering that the professor has already left. What? Yo, this dude hates Flora. Where did he go? He uncharacteristically vanishes, leaving a note on Flora's back saying he'd return in a moment, and when we get to the door of the tower, he returns saying he needed to check something. Okay. The gang prepares to enter the tower, and if there's one thing I know, it's that there's about to be some pretty difficult puzzles. First of all, let's admire the music that makes us feel like we're back in that old village. And just like the tower in that village, the pagoda is a series of upward puzzles, hard ones, but it makes sense. This is allegedly the professor we're dealing with. Once we make it to the top floor, we meet...
Welcome, Herschel Layton.
I had a feeling you were behind this, Dr. Stun Gun. Or should I say, Dimitri Allen?
An impressive deduction. Does anything ever get past you, Herschel?
Dr. Stangan, whose real name is Dimitri Allen, was posing as the future professor this whole time. He reveals that he had to lure the professor to future London both for his memories and his motives. Because not only was Dimitri in love with Claire, the same girl the professor was seeing, she is dead. Yes, if you haven't put the pieces together yet, she was the researcher killed in the first time machine disaster. So using the professor's memories, Dimitri plans to finalize his time machine experiment, go back, and save Claire. I guess because Layton was with Claire on the day of the accident, he can use that as a load state for the time machine. I don't know. This turns into the second battle of wits. We are now organizing a 5 versus 5 brawl. That's 5 of Dimitri's henchmen versus Layton, Luke, future Luke, Flora, and I guess the fucking bird.
Very nicely done, Herschel.
Give it up, Dimitri!
Give it up? Oh, no. I'm just getting started.
Who is that?
Bill Hawks.
Bill Hawks is revealed to be held captive, and now so are we. But just when things look hopeless, we are saved by another Professor Layton because the one we're standing with...
What?
Yeah, this was a pretty wild one for me, not gonna lie. All that confusion aside, Layton frees everyone, but then Dimitri escapes with the Prime Minister, and though we found the emergency exit, the staircase is too thin for everyone to fit together. So we break off with future Luke and Flora because the professor will literally take every single chance he has, and head down the escape with Don and Luke. Once we get to safety, you goddamn bet there is some splaining to do. The professor explains to Luke that Don Paolo is not our enemy, he's our hired trump card. It all started back at the hospital when we visited Andrew Schrader, who was not alert to the fact that Luke, even in the future, was still a child. This tipped off the professor that it was actually another disguise of Don Paolo, but how did the professor encourage him to help? Because Don Paolo also wants to achieve justice for Claire, who he was simping for.
Here, this is for you.
What is it?
A letter, of course. Read it at home.
Why don't you just tell me what it says? I'm right here, after all.
In short, this.
Layton! You will pay for this someday!
What was that?
Huh?
And just like that, we have the origin story for Don Paolo, the OG antagonist. Remember in the first game when Luke asked the professor why Don Paolo hated him? This is that moment, guys. Everyone gets humanly characterized in this game. So here, the atmosphere, lame. The pacing, slow. But the gosh darn characters, all of them, from Professor Layton to Don Paolo, carry this plot, and there will be more. Not to spoil for those who haven't played it, but I can't help but view the parallels between Ace Attorney's third game. Can we just appreciate A, the romantic backstory of our main hero, and B, this olive branch moment where the classic rival is now helping us? And there's another really big one, but I can't talk about it yet. But anyway, the professor with Don, Paul, explains Claire to Luke, her life and death, and how her death was hidden from the news altogether. They decide to recon at the hotel with Flora, and future Luke and Don Paolo leaves to attend to other things. When we arrive at the hotel, it's just Flora because future Luke also had stuff happening. Talking with his makeshift offspring, the professor starts to imply skepticism involving future Luke, when Chelmy shows up to tell us that he saw someone who looks like Claire. Layton says it's not her, it physically cannot be, but maybe it's a relative, and Chelmy agrees to do a background search. The professor decides he's going to cross the River Thames to look for Dimitri, but as we are about to head out, Luke is now missing because characters in this game run off every 2 seconds without saying anything. When we find him, he is sulking at the pair of statues, and when we click on him, the music immediately gives away everything. Luke, who's been abrasive, frustrated, and distant this whole game, tells the professor that he's actually going to be moving soon, as his father got a new job overseas. That means no more adventures as the apprentice of Professor Layton, quite obviously a very scary and sad time for him. But the professor reassures him that distance is a superficial obstacle to their friendship, and that no matter what, there is nothing that will ever come between them. We're gonna talk about this later, but remember, always planned as a trilogy. I did think whatever Luke was going through, though, was going to be the change that shifted him more towards his future self, because let's face it, this guy is nothing like Luke. The game even seems to hint at this with him asking, but no, I was wrong. Luke perks up a little bit, and the two decide to continue their investigation, the professor revealing that since all the scientists they've encountered have wet feet, it's very likely they're working near the river. Oh! So we go to the tunnel that crosses underneath, and on the other side, nuclear reactors in London, the most famous landmark. On the other side, we immediately find Don Paolo, who crossed with his flying machine. Using the sewer grate to sneak into the facility, we encounter a scientist and offer to rescue him, but in the middle of our conversation, the two guards from earlier show up, and what part of time travel do they need a fucking tank for? Right, so we do a puzzle to take care of the guards that would otherwise kill most people, but desperate times, I guess? Continuing on, the professor understands that not everything in this hideaway is for building a time machine. No, there's something else going on here, but our friend has no idea what. We find more scientists who are eager to return to their own time. They're cooperative with the professor and tell us we can find Dimitri right in the research room. And as we go to enter, it's a family reunion. Literally. Because all of a sudden, through a side door, we are helped by the very mystery woman herself, Claire. Younger sister Celeste. She's also here to bring justice for Claire and knows the professor and her had a relationship, and with that, all of our mysteries are solved, but something's not right. Isn't it kinda early for that? Layton says that Claire never mentioned she had a younger sister, and Celeste says they were on bad terms up to her death. She says she would have reached out to the professor sooner, but didn't want to attract the family, and she says she loves the game Yakuza 0, but is unable to consume gluten. Before long, the family catches up, and the party decides to split, Celeste and Don Paolo diverting for one exit, and Layton and Luke the other. Outside, Luke begins to ask questions about Claire's death, and the professor explains the events of the explosion in full. By the time he arrived at the scene, it was a blazing hell, the streets cluttered in a frantic state with people screaming. The professor specifically recalls a child approaching him, wailing for his lost parents. And if you zoom in on that child, after the incident, the professor noticed that the explosion was quietly forgotten. No news outlet or media reported on it, so he did his own investigation, where he learned that a powerful political ally had covered everything up. He was then brutally attacked, and though he survived, his remaining notes on the case were seized. He wouldn't find the answers to Claire's death then, but he might now if Dimitri knows anything. Dimitri and maybe one more person. Luke asks who, and the professor says, it's almost time. With this, we're basically about to enter the endgame, and so as our last little intermission, I just wanted to talk real fast about the US commercial. So here we have a commercial that aired on American television in 2010 when the game was released here, and I actually remember this one. Not only is it extremely accurate with its subject of time travel and sandwich puzzle and memes from over a oh lord, but if you watch carefully, you may notice the actor they cast to play Professor Layton is none other than Jim Parsons, aka Sheldon from The Big Bang Theory. The hit show that went on for 12 seasons here in the United States, eventually to everyone's annoyance, but it was still fresh at this point. Nintendo likes to do this a lot, as we talked about in the Curious Village video, but they didn't draw any special attention to it because they didn't really need to. 2010 was season 3 of The Big Bang Theory, when the show was peaking in viewership and ratings. So not only was the whole celebrity marketing tactic obvious at this point, the actor was too, at least for us Americans. And of course, it would make sense that TV's most iconic nerd at the time was used to play the brainiac professor and promote this game. However, let's be glad they never went further with anything but this, because could you just imagine for a second?
Bazinga.
But I do want to put forth the debate stemming from this. If that Layton live-action movie they announced forever ago actually came out, who should play him? Because a lot of the Discord and Reddit threads I see on this debate seem to think Benadryl cul-de-sac, and that one I struggle to perceive. In Japan, it should absolutely be this guy. He's the voice and actor in the commercials, and I imagine if the live action wasn't canceled or in limbo or whatever, this is probably what we would have got. Or maybe 21 Savage. Big stretch before we get into this finale because it's a long one, it's a heavy one. We've spent a long time talking about the events of the game, and it's about to all unravel. So, the gang heads to the Arms restaurant so they can meet up with Future Luke. Inside, we've gathered all the big players. Future Luke, Flora, Celeste, Don Paolo, Luke, Chelmy, and Barton, all sitting patiently as Layton is about to explain everything he's worked out about the events of this game in our annual What Does Level 5 Expect Us to Believe This Time sequence. So, y'all ready for this one? Okay. London of the future is not in the future at all. It's just a stage set underground in a cavern. There was never a working time machine. The clock shop might be a wormhole that takes people into the earth on a big lift. Get it? The big clock was moving you down, not sending you forward. Dimitri created Future London not just to convince us, but the scientists he kidnapped, so they desperately try to help him with his experiments and find a way back to their time, and that is the third act revolution we know as Shin Megami Professor 4. Yeah, so did I or did I not tell you that the late game twists get more and more insane each game, only that's not even the cream of the crop. You probably have a ton of questions right now. How did they have light? How did they have weather? Was everyone else acting? Why is the lift in the clock shop not visible down below? Shouldn't it look like a tower? How did they build it in only 5 to 10 years? But none of that is important. Nobody really gets too caught up on this one because, believe it or not, there's a plot twist coming that's much worse and not in the way you expect. But for now, I'll ask, what's the most believable? Robots? Hallucinogenic gas that works on suggestion powers? Or a replica London complete with River Thames underground? Also, have I been saying River Thames correctly, man? I stress so much about this pronunciation. Now our mystery gets solved with a special stamp called The Whole Story, and this was so cool the first time around. You just knew all the cards weren't up yet. Then the professor reveals the barkeep to be Dimitri, and it turns into another battle of wits. Dimitri has the place rigged with explosives so he can escape and buy time, so we have to figure out where they are, and we do that. But then I guess the sensors were arranged to spell out the word lie, meaning he never had any in the first place. Boy, for a genius, this guy's a fucking idiot. With the game up, Dimitri finally begins to explain the reasoning behind his whole scheme. 10 years ago, him and Bill Hawks were colleagues at the Polydimensional Institute and worked on the time machine together.
Bill thought we should use Claire as the first test subject. She was our lab assistant. I, of course, vehemently opposed this idea. I loved her too, you see.
Oh my god, was there a character in this game who didn't love Claire? It was around then when Dimitri also found a flaw in the machine, and when he requested to push back the experiment, Bill denied. That's because at the time, Bill had already made a deal to sell the research, and he needed to prove they weren't just talking the talk with time travel. So the experiment proceeds, and when Dimitri learns of it,
it's too late to stop.
What have you done?
Dimitri concludes by saying that Bill was able to become prime minister with his earnings, robbing both Dimitri of his work and his love. For this reason, he always sought to time travel to take back his research and save Claire. The professor interjects by telling Dimitri that he was actually being used the entire time, and get ready because it's time for the cutscene where he points.
Someone here masterminded a scheme even more awful than yours, Dimitri. And that person is there!
I think you're mistaken, Professor.
Future Luke, real name Clive, has been scheming. You see, Clive's parents were in the apartment next to the Institute when the explosion occurred, leaving Clive an orphan and crying in the arms of the professor. He was then fostered by a wealthy woman, Constance Dove, and when she passed 5 years ago, she left her entire fortune to Clive. Clive, having graduated at this point, then took a job with the newspaper where he began to discover all about the people who caused the explosion, also known as Bill and Dimitri. So Clive then approached Dimitri, who didn't know who he was, and encouraged him to take another whack at time travel, and then he also built fake London. Then he started to round up scientists to start work, but unknown to Dimitri, they were never making a time machine. Nope, they were building a weapon.
And I thought scientists were supposed to be observant. While you focused on your machine, I had a different goal. Though some may call it revenge.
What are you saying, Clive?
Enough explanations! Let me show you!
Hey!
Flora gets kidnapped by future Luke, who escapes onto Howl's moving castle, and it is on! Even when Clive wasn't acting suspicious as future Luke, he sucked. He never let us have any fun, nor did he answer any of our questions. Let's get his ass. Anyway, here's a cutscene where the professor tells everyone to run away so he can stare menacingly for like 3 seconds, then run away himself. Don Paolo tells Layton that the thing he was working on was Layton's car, which can now fly. He's pretty cool, that Paul.
Don't get emotional on me, Layton. I'm only doing this for Flora.
So what the hell was all that shit where you were, you know... So we get into the car, and here's the song.
I'll go with you.
Don't worry, Celeste. We'll take care of this.
This cutscene and this whole part of the game give me some real Scarab type energy. We land with the initial goal of saving Flora, but of course this bad boy is laced with puzzles, some of the hardest, but they are all really enjoyable, except for this one. Luke and the professor first save Flora before going directly to confront Clive himself, who is just straight up genociding half of London. This has to be one of the cruelest cutscenes, like, damn, level 5. Because making a bunch more victims the same as him is somehow the thing to do. That said, his speech on how the government views the public has a resonance to it, and just for a small second, we remember that Clive is a cold-blooded murdering idiot. Clive escapes to another area, leaving the professor and gang alone until Celeste finds them and says we all need to shut down the generator, but when we go to the generator room, it's being powered by the Prime Minister, which is somehow a factually correct sentence. Clive tells us if we move him, the fortress will detonate and take most of London with it, so the professor devises a puzzle to remove him, and when it's done, we do a gear puzzle so that we can reverse the energy and shut this monster of a machine down.
Reversing the energy flow has caused the fortress to start destroying itself.
Well, you get what you pay for, Mr. Layton. The group needs to evacuate before the machine blows, but Clive...
Huh? Now what is it? No, no, no! This isn't happening. It can't end this way. It won't end this way!
Bill Hawks, conscious and active for the first time since the prologue, whose life we just saved, is still being a stuck-up, arrogant snob. See, everyone else who's evil kinda has a good reason to be. Not this guy, he's just a bitch. Even as Layton drives him to escape, but on that drive we come across an immovable patch of debris that we must clear in a puzzle. Can the car not fly?
Oh, and one more thing. See that red button over there? That's your ticket out of trouble. Just an extra little feature I added.
Don Paulo, goated. And just as Layton is about to make it safely away from the machine, the best cutscene.
It's too dangerous.
He's not the only one to blame. You do know that, don't you, Professor?
I do.
Celeste knows we can't let Clive die, and the professor agrees, dropping her onto the time bomb machine before taking everyone else to safety and heading back. In her speech of mercy, Celeste encourages Clive to want to live and atone, and Clive, realizing the entire situation, agrees. She helps him to escape the fortress just before it's too late, with the professor snatching both of them up. This speaks volumes to how good of a person Celeste is, or perhaps how much guilt she feels, because did you catch what she said to Clive just now? With everyone safe, the entire plan thwarted, Clive is now seized by authorities, but not before the professor can speak with him. He asks just one final question: if you knew I'd stop you, why involve me? And Clive responds by telling him that it was initially Dimitri who wanted him, but he began to enjoy their company at some point during their travels. Deep down, he just wanted someone to show him the light from inside the madness, like the professor had already done for him before. And apparently the professor had no idea that Clive was that boy, which, let's be honest, we all knew. This was just over-exposition. Clive thanks the professor for everything and says he hopes to see him again, and that's his character. There's a dichotomy between how the two, one hero, one villain, and I guess also Dimitri, interpret loss and where it puts them in life. The professor, no matter how lost or unwound it was, held firm to the future, but Dimitri and Clive did not, wanting to either reverse their suffering or bring everyone else down into it. But then you have Bill Hawks, who gets nothing but subtle shade from the inspector, and that's it. Fuck this guy. Dimitri gives a big long speech about hubris and how he feels terrible for all he's done, but then tells the professor there's something he got wrong. And at this exact moment, Celeste appears, covering her mouth and full of tears. She says,
I don't think I have much longer here, Hershel.
I don't know what you mean.
You've taken awfully good care of that hat I gave you.
What did you say?
When Chelmy appears to say he got the results of the background check, Claire never had a younger sister, the professor puts everything all together. The time machine experiment from 10 years ago was somewhat successful, as Claire was shot into the present moments before the machine exploded, but her body in the present was never atomically stable. It was trying to return to its own time. Dimitri looked for ways to fix her condition so Claire wouldn't have to go back, but she insisted against it. They tried to cheat the natural law of the world, and now she needs to accept her punishment for it. And with all the affairs of the present finished, it's time for Claire to go back to the moment that will seal her fate. Let's all watch this last one together.
I suppose this is it, Hershel. I have to go back to my own time, back to that day when we parted.
No, Claire.
I'm sorry, I can't stay.
Claire, wait!
We had so many plans for the future. You won't forget, will you? Our shared past and our lost future.
You can't go! I don't want to say goodbye again. I can't, I won't!
I know you. And I know you'll stay strong. After all, that's what a gentleman does. I must go now, Hershel. Thank you for everything. Goodbye.
She's gone!
Dear God. There's just something about watching the man who keeps everything unrealistically calm refuse to give up that destroys your soul. He leaves his stoic aura for a moment to beg not to be put through the suffering again before he ultimately is, crying, breaking his own rule to take off his hat so he can hold tight the last piece he has of Claire, and this is how the game ends. Everyone loses. Claire dies, the professor is heartbroken again and alone, Luke leaves, and everyone else needs to atone for their crimes while Bill Hawks, the one who started all of this, stays the Prime Minister, and this is not only how the game ends, but the entire series. And let me tell you folks, Level 5 eventually came back to build off this future, but it doesn't get any less unwound. And the credits have been going this entire time. Level 5 is a damn savage because the images will only expand your misery. Luckily, most of us were crying too hard to even notice. This is followed by a cutscene where Luke gives a final hug to the professor before parting way. Oh my god, Mom, get the Zoloft. It's all the genuine emotion from these characters who we've been led to believe are static, a payoff so heavy you can feel the development streaming down your face. And after this, there is, for once, no to be continued. It's just the end. Psych! The professor gets a letter from Luke teasing a remote adventure that, never happens. Or at least that's what I originally had written. TLDR, level 5 leaves doors open, then closes them and opens them again, then closes them and now opens them again. It would be cool if World of Steam finally gives us that 15+ year sequel, but... Guys, I wanted this video done in November. November! And I'm glad that my Layton content keeps aging poorly because that means new stuff is happening. But like, dude, this didn't... Okay, new game set in America right after Unwound Future, ends with bullets. Okay, they got that part right. But listen... What you need to understand is that the weight behind the third Professor Layton's ending was that it was just that, an ending. Originally, this was what we were left with, and no more. For a series that started off with such lighthearted themes, I can't tell you what it felt like to encounter this finale as a child. Most of us at an age not yet having the tools to interpret it, or worse, being an adult and understanding it all too well. It's the professor at his lowest, and it's the last we see of him chronologically. Luke won't even be around to console this guy. I get level 5 wanted to close things down, and this was a great ending, but I wouldn't even call it bittersweet. It's just depressing. So that's why I'm putting it in the games you didn't expect to make you water pile. I talk a lot about our main characters, but they aren't the only tragic ones. Dimitri is a reasonable antagonist, not ideal, but driven without consequence to get things back to how they were. At our lowest moments, it's hard not to relate to him. Or even Clive, who's undoubtedly a much more extreme case, but trapped in a situation where he believes his only form of peace is vengeance. And then you have Claire, the first character to actively die in a Professor Layton plot. I think I'm just gonna leave it at that. Also, Subject 3. Can't forget about Subject 3. All of the Layton games this far have been about loss, and spoiler alert, pretty much all of them are. But if Unwound Future teaches any lesson, it's how you deal with the loss that matters. Through the game, we witness characters exhibit anger, bargaining, depression, but the professor is the poster boy for acceptance, even after losing everything: his love, his apprentice, his city. The final cutscene ends with him smiling serenely out the window in his office. And that might be the most important piece of character development there is.